afternoon. It is our RVing adventures. We are here in Franklin, Kentucky. We are coming to you from Dueling Grounds Distillery, right?
Yes.
Dueling Grounds Distillery. So we're here for a tour. We're gonna learn more about bourbon and their brand, and
Hopefully we'll see the entire process that this location, unlike Maker's Mark, because this is a smaller facility, so hopefully we can see more and share that with you guys.
we're excited. Maddie's not too excited. She doesn't get to do a tasting. She's just kind of here to videotape. So, but at least she gets to participate in this one. They're allowing her to go through the tour, which is good. But as you can see, she's a little bored. But alrighty then, let's start. Bye.
About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with
because of its proximity to Nashville, where he was a representative at the time. Already kind of a famous place for hosting duels, and the fact that dueling was illegal in Tennessee at that time. So Houston came and stayed at the Sanford Duncan Inn, which is still there. It was a little stagecoach inn, which of course had a tavern, so people could get their liquid courage before they go out and shoot or get a shot at. Even Andrew Jackson spent the night there before he had a duel on the Red River, which is just a few miles away. So on the day of the duel, Sam Houston did shoot first. He shot William White in the groin. White screamed out, "You've killed me." He did not die for many years, but I'm sure he probably felt like he was, or maybe wanted to in that moment. They wanted to charge Houston with attempted murder, since dueling was illegal in Tennessee, where he was a representative. But the governor said he was acting out of self-defense, so he didn't get charged with anything. The very last duel that we had that kind of ended all the duels was in 1827. Attorney Calvin Smith shot and killed attorney Robert Brink, and he was charged with murder in both Tennessee and Kentucky. So the land that the dueling grounds was on was this contested area at the border of Tennessee and Kentucky, of which state it belonged to. Kind of a no man's land, kind of why it was used as a dueling grounds in the first place. Never went to trial in Kentucky, but he was convicted in Tennessee. At that point, the Tennessee Supreme Court stated that if any more lawyers participated in any more duels, they would be disbarred from the law profession. So I assume the fear of death was not enough, fear of losing your job. That was kind of the end of the duels that we had. Now, there's so much history of dueling in the state of Kentucky that it still has an impact on the current Kentucky Constitution. If you're an elected official in the state of Kentucky, part of your oath for office still includes the affirmation that being a citizen of the state, you've never fought a duel, in or out of the state, or accepted a challenge for a duel, or acted as a second. So they still have to say that to this day. The state line is a fairly straight line, except for right here in Simpson County, you have a little dip that dips down into Tennessee. In that dip currently is where Kentucky Downs is, the horse track, and it's where the dueling grounds used to be. So if you imagine a straight line over that dip, that little triangular area was that contested area at the border. When dueling became illegal in Tennessee, it was still legal for a time in Kentucky. So the rumor is the Duncan family that owned the inn bribed the surveyor with some bourbon. to get them to add the dip, which kept that dueling grounds in an area where it was still legal for people to have duels. That area was also part of a farm that was known by the name Lincoln Pinch Farm. So that's where the name of the bourbon comes from.
What name is that? What name is that?
We really don't know.
German?
That is the only mention of it in the archives in the city. Other claims to fame for Simpson County. Johnny Cash and June Carter got married at the local Methodist church 53 years ago. Jim Bowie of the Bowie Knife is from this area. And the actress Annie Potts also grew up right here. Now, have y'all been to bourbon distilleries before? I think I heard y'all talking about it. So, in your visits to these distilleries, did they go over any of the rules of bourbon? And if they did, do you remember any of them?
Like how to drink bourbon?
No, not how to drink bourbon, but where it can be made, what goes in it, or any of. So it has to have at least 51% corn.
Right.
The other 49% is up to the distiller, but most people go higher than that. For example, we have 66% corn in ours. The other grains that are most widely used are rye, wheat, and barley in any combination, really. Barley being one of the more essential ones that has enzymes, and we'll go over that a little bit more in the process. Also has to be made in America, can't be made anywhere else in the world. In 1964, the federal government proclaimed bourbon America's native spirit, so we're the only ones that can make it. Now, contrary to popular belief, it does not have to come from Kentucky to be a bourbon, but 95% of all bourbons are made in Kentucky. It is the birthplace of bourbon, and I would say that only good bourbon is made in Kentucky. You also have to age your bourbon in a new charred oak barrel. It cannot be a used barrel.
Right.
If it's a used barrel, you're making a different type of whiskey or a whole other product altogether. So as soon as you pull your bourbon out of that new barrel, even if you put the exact same recipe back into it, you could not call it bourbon. It's not a new barrel. There's also different proof levels that have to be followed throughout the process. Alcohol proof is just double the alcohol percentage. So 100 proof alcohol is 50%. You can't distill bourbon any higher than 160 proof. It has to be 160 or less coming off the still. You cannot put it into a barrel any higher than 125. Ours goes in at 120. Has to be bottled at least 80 proof. Ours are all bottled at 100 proof or higher. Last rule is you can't have any added sugars, flavors, colors, or additives. And that's a difference between a whiskey and a bourbon. If you go into a liquor store, of course, you'll find cinnamon whiskeys, maple, honey, peach, all kinds of different flavored whiskeys. But bourbon is just bourbon. Whatever comes out of that barrel is what you get. The only thing you can add to it is water to cut the proof down. All right. Now, we'll go back in the back. We just ask that you don't touch anything. There could be some hot equipment unless I tell you that it's okay. Feel free to ask questions, take pictures or video. About the mashing first, which is just the cooking of your grains. This is our mash tun, so this is where the whole process starts. We start off with some water in here that we heat up to 190 degrees. While it's heating up, we're going to add that ground corn first. That corn is going to cook at 190 degrees for about 45 minutes. What happens at that high temperature is we are extracting starches from the corn out into our solution so that we can convert those into sugar. After that corn cooks for 45 minutes at 190, we're going to cool it down to 165 degrees so that we can add our flavor grain, which is a red winter wheat. We chose wheat because that's what we grow in this area. We wanted to be able to buy from and support our local farmers as much as possible. And wheated bourbons tend to be a little bit sweeter, a little bit softer or smoother than some of those higher rye content. We'll pull it down to 145 and add that malted barley. As I mentioned, the malted barley has enzymes. It's going to help speed up that conversion of those starches into sugar. And that sugar is then what the yeast is going to consume to convert into the alcohol. You always have to have some sort of sugar for your yeast. If you're making moonshine, just dump a bunch of sugar in there with your corn. Fruit sugars for your wines and brandies, agave sugar for tequila, molasses for rum, so on and so on. Every spirit kind of has a different sugar. So that process of extracting those starches and converting them into sugars usually takes us about 3.5 to 4 hours. At that point, we've got this really sweet mash. It tastes almost like grits or like cream of wheat with sugar in it. Once we hit that target temperature, we're going to divert the flow of the mash into this hose right here. And that's going to lead us over to one of our fermenters. So once we cool the mash and pump it into the fermenter, we put the yeast in there. That yeast will start a reaction with those sugars. The products of that reaction are alcohol, carbon dioxide, and heat. Fermentation usually takes about 4 days. The first couple of days, the activity is so vigorous, there's so much carbon dioxide being released, that it pushes all the grain up to the top. At the beginning, all the grain is pretty much at the top right now. So if I spoon this to the side, you can see that fermentation in action right there. Very, very active right now. This was just cooked yesterday. So all that carbon dioxide that's being released is pushing all this grain up to the top. Once it gets towards the end of the fermentation, most of those sugars have been consumed, less carbon dioxide is being released. That grain will start falling down to the bottom just by gravity. Fresh yeast in there. We do what's known as sweet mashing.
Okay.
We don't sour mash. Sour mash, we would take yeast from this and add it to the next one. We use fresh yeast every time.
Okay.
And there's only like a handful of people that do that. There's still some activity going on, but not quite as vigorous as that other one there. Some of that grain has already started to fall down to the bottom, the heavier piece. Once it has completely fallen to the bottom, that's when we know that it's ready to be distilled. We want to extract or strip all the pure alcohol out of it. That's done by distillation. So we'll take the entire contents, the grain and the liquid. We're going to take that over to our still. So we pump the grain and the liquid over to the still to do a stripping run. So the stripping run is technically our first distillation. But when we collect from this, it's going to go back to the still one more time for the final spirit run. So we're technically known as a double pot distilled bourbon. This is a pot still as opposed to a column or continuous still. If y'all have been to any of the bigger facilities, you probably call it continuous still. Those places that have the capacity to pump out barrels of bourbon almost every 90 seconds. We make about 2.5 barrels per week. So at a certain temperature, those alcohol vapors will start evaporating. They have a lower boiling point than water. So those vapors are going to rise up to this copper column, which is helping remove sulfates. Eventually, those vapors will transfer across the stainless steel arm up top and into our condenser. You see my handprint on here. That is a double-walled cylinder that has cold water running through it, which creates a cold airspace, and that's going to condense those vapors back into a liquid, and then it'll come out what we call the parrot. We're going to get about 50 gallons or so of those low wines. We're going to do that 4 or 5 times throughout the week. All those low wines we've collected go back into the still for that final spirit run. So on that final spirit run, the first part that we're going to separate is called foreshots. If you've ever heard someone talk about moonshine making people sick or making people go blind even, it's a real thing. It could be that they didn't take those foreshots out. That's the part that contains methanol. So that part we're going to discard. The next part is called head, which is a very high alcohol content. It's too high to be bourbon. So we collect those high proof heads till it gets down to 160, set those to the side for later. Then we start collecting our heart, which is the heart of your product. That's the stuff that's going to go into the barrel. That's the clear stuff you can sample up front. We get it off the still from 160 proof all the way down to about 125. Usually rounds out somewhere close to 150 proof after it's all been collected, about 75% alcohol. Once we get to the end of the heart portion, usually around 125 proof for us, different from distillery to distillery. That's where we have to make the most important decision, but also one of our favorites, because that's where we're going to stay my still for 2 minutes and constantly taste it. Then they moved to Louisville in the 90s and started making bourbon barrels here in Kentucky, which I assume they're making more money here than they were in Scotland. A lot of bourbon barrels, after they're used, get shipped to Scotland to put the aged scotches in. And also currently, just in the state of Kentucky, we have almost 10 million barrels of bourbon aging in storage right now. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pull samples and we're going to taste all of them. It's the hardest part of the job. It's typically us three right here. We're doing all the tasting, so we'll compare notes, and typically the one that we like the best is going to become that single barrel cask strength.
Okay.
We're not going to add any water to it. Whatever proof is in the barrel, that's what it's going to be bottled at. So the current one that we have on the shelf is 22.2 proof. The other barrels will become our small batch, which is what we're bottling right now. So the small batch we dump into this blending tank right here. We'll add water to proof them down to 100. Smallest bottling section you've ever seen. But this is our labeler. You can see it's full of labels on here. You can come up to close with that if you want to. So you'll lay your bottle on there like so. Press on that pedal. It's going to label both sides of that bottle for us. Then we're going to line up for here. Push up a button. We're going to fill up 4 bottles at a time. After those fill up, we will, yep, coming straight out of that tank. So after they fill up, we're going to insert our guns cork on top, and it is a real cork. Some people use synthetic these days, but this is a real one. So we'll cork these up.
And those are our gifts, right?
After your purchase. In the
Oh,
gift
okay.
shop.
All right.
Free with purchase. You purchase the bottle, and then what comes in it is.
There you go. There you go.
So this is a little placeholder for that small batch medallion that we apply on there. If you look at our cast strength bottle up front, there's a different medallion, different color scheme on the label. Then we're going to handwrite the batch, proof, age, everything on the back. Then we'll use a little handheld heat gun with some shrink wrap bands to seal up the bottle top, and then it's ready to go into a box for distribution or for use or sale up in the gift shop. Here is pretty much the definition of a craft distiller. There's no computer automation. We do pretty much everything by hand. Everything is done in-house except for that store. And for the most part, it's this 3 guys right here. You see it. This is pretty much most of the business. Steve is our founder, master distiller. Mark is Pete. Steve is the head distiller, and kind of manages the back of the house. I manage the front of the house. We all do production. You won't be surprised to see all of us giving a tour or making cocktails. My wife does a lot of the graphic design and social media from home, and then we have a couple bartenders that help us out on the weekends and stuff.
Thanks for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to get notified on our newest videos. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time, because we're out there making memories one adventure at a time.